I'm Dr. John Gartner.
And I'm Dr. Harry Segal.
And welcome to this preview of Shrinking Trump.
Oh, what another week it's been in this strange twilight of democracy that we live in. John and I in this show, we look at a number of different issues, including the emerging constitutional crisis, which is just arriving. We also talk about the pushback from the universities that are finally sort of getting together and forming coalitions to resist the vicious attack from the Trump administration.
And we also have going to be discussing the parallels between what happened in Nazi Germany and what's happening now. But as people who are part of academia, we're happy to have some good news for a change. We're very proud of the way that Harvard is standing up to the Trump administration and inspiring some of the other universities to do the same.
We also have as a guest the third visit from Laurie Winer, who is a journalist, an academic, and an expert on Hitler, and as always, just a lot of fun to talk with.
I feel like this is the moment we've been worried about. I mean, I entitled the show Constitutional Crisis Now. Originally, I thought Apocalypse Now, but I thought that might be a little dramatic. But this really is the constitutional crisis that everyone has been worrying about and warning about. Now people are saying it's here. And we're going to hear from some commentators who know a lot more about the law than you and I do, who are going to talk about that. But first, I want to talk about what's happening. You know, we all know that the Supreme Court ordered the Trump administration to facilitate the return of this innocent man, you know, who'd been sent to an El Salvadorian, snatched off a Maryland street where I live, and dumped into the black hole of El Salvador. And so the Supreme Court told them to get him back. You know, you talked about his character pathology. One of the things about his character pathology is that he takes pleasure in flouting the law. You know, remember I introduced the term a few weeks ago, fuckery, you know, as a technical term. They're just fucking with the system. They're always like manipulating it or faking it or, you know, defrauding it but they're always working it in some way. So what he's doing is blatantly flouting the Supreme Court, but in this way that isn't technically flouting it but it's a wink, wink, nod, nod, so that everybody knows we just found some language to use, or we just found some way to play act that we're not actually not obeying the Supreme Court. It sort of reminds me of, and you know, you and I grew up in New York City. Well, so did Trump. Okay, if you walked around the streets of New York, there's always some guy with a table, right, playing three-card Monte. Right, three-card Monte is where you try to find the queen, and it seems obvious where it is, but he's moving the cards around, and then you bet, and then you're always wrong because he's, you know, better at it than you are. That's what Trump is doing with this guy, right? So, but it's so obvious, right? It's such an obvious ploy. It's such an obvious trick or scam. So here they are in the Oval Office, right? So here we have the heads of state of America. Just to set this up for people who didn't see this, and the president of El Salvador, right? Presumably between the two men sitting there in the Oval Office, they can negotiate the release of one innocent man, right? We've negotiated all kinds of releases of like spies from China and Russia, but here they are sitting literally next to each other, and they are explaining why it's impossible for them to bring him back.
And exactly, but I just want to set this up a little bit more carefully. Okay, so this new head of El Salvador, who calls himself a dictator, imposed order on a completely disorganized society where there was no law. But one of the things he did was to build one of the worst prisons known to man right now. That's so brutal that it's really not a prison. It's a place where you put people who will eventually die. And Trump didn't just put this one guy by mistake. He sent hundreds there. It was a photo op for the Department of Homeland Security, Republicans went down there to be filmed in front of it.
Amazing.
Okay. It turns out there were many, many people who were put in there who had no criminal record, who were snatched off the street by ICE agents wearing black masks like Nazis. And so that's the setting, right? So finally, with one case, they're saying, bring this guy back. And then another judge is also saying, those planes took off for El Salvador and they didn't come back when I told them to. So that's also working its way through the courts. So that's setting it up. So the president of El Salvador, who Trump is paying to take care of these prisoners, and is also paying him to build 5 more facilities there.
Yep.
That came out today.
Yes.
And then in the White House, of course, Trump likes to let reporters in who he then, denigrates. And they come in and they ask questions. And John's 3-card Monte is right there. Both guys, I don't know. Can you get him back? I don't know if you can get him back. I can't. Yeah. That's what we're looking at, right?
Well, instead of looking for the queen, we're looking for an innocent man who's been sent to hell.
Can President Bukele weigh in on this? Do you plan to return him?
Well, I'm supposed to have suggested that I smuggle a terrorist into the United States, right?
It's always
how can I return him to the United States? Like, could I smuggle him into the United States, or what do I do? Of course, I'm not going to do it. It's like, the question is preposterous. How can I smuggle a terrorist into the United States? I don't have the power to return him to the United States.
So you could release him inside El Salvador.
Yeah, but I'm not releasing. We're not very fond of releasing terrorists into our country. We just turned the murder capital of the world into the safest country of the Western Hemisphere, and you want us to go back into releasing criminals so we can go back to being the murder capital of the world? No, that's not going to happen.
Well, they'd love to have a criminal, released into
I mean, there's a fascination.
They would love it.
Yeah.
They're sick. These are sick people.
Right. He's not a criminal. He's not a terrorist. And obviously, he could return him to the country. But while he's talking, Trump was smirking.
Exactly.
He was smirking, right? Well, I can't release a terrorist. And he's going, yeah, there you go. Like, we tricked you. We found a workaround. Ha, ha, ha.
And he got to accuse the press of wanting terrorists to be released back in the country. So it's such bullshit, and it's so terrible that this is happening in front of the world. What message is this sending?
That's right.
That we can't be trusted at all, and we can't.
And of course, we know everyone in his cabinet is an enabler. Let's see how little Marco explains why the courts have no business weighing in on this.
I don't understand what the confusion is. This individual is a citizen of El Salvador. He was illegally in the United States and was returned to his country. That's where you deport people, back to their country of origin, except for Venezuela that wasn't refusing to take people back, or places like that. I can tell you this, Mr. President, no, the foreign policy of the United States is conducted by the President of the United States, not by a court. And no court in the United States has a right to conduct the foreign policy of the United States. It's that simple. End of story.
And that's what the Supreme Court held, by the way, to Marco's point. The Supreme Court said exactly what Marco said, that no court has the authority to compel the foreign policy function of the United States. We won a case 9-0, and people like CNN are portraying it as a loss, as usual, because they want foreign terrorists in the country who kidnap women and children. But President Trump, his policy is foreign terrorists that are here illegally get expelled from the country, which, by the way, is a 90-10 issue.
Well, Mr. President, you said that if the Supreme Court said someone needed to be returned, that you would abide by that. You said that on Air Force One just a few days ago. And they said that it must be facilitated.
Why don't you just say, isn't it wonderful that we're keeping criminals out of our country? Why can't you just say that? Why do you go over and over? And that's why nobody watches you anymore. You have no credibility. Please, go ahead.
President Trump.
Why do you keep asking this question? Why can't you just be happy that we're taking care of the terrorists?
And Caitlin Collins, who's an excellent reporter, was saying, you said this on the airplane. How does it on Air Force One? How does this stand up with this? She was asking a completely pertinent question. There was nothing rude about it. But listen, he's acting like a dictator. This is what dictators do.
This is what dictators do.
And Marco Rubio is such a spineless little. I mean, I just can't believe
he's a toady. He really is like a toad, right? He's just a little look your ass, right? He's just a toady.
It was just a terrible response, and
But also,
utterly irrelevant.
But also, this is what I mean about the fuckery, okay? Which is now we're going to make this a foreign policy issue. You see, this is a foreign policy issue. Well, that's outside the purview of the courts. This is a foreign policy issue. No, it's not. It's not a foreign policy issue, but that's the way they manipulate. That's the 3-card Monte again. Okay.
Right.
No, this isn't a legal issue of our of our depriving someone of their liberty and throwing them down in a pit. No, this is a foreign policy issue.
It's depriving someone of his due process, which is guaranteed by the Constitution. And it doesn't just apply to citizens. It applies to anyone who's here. And by the way, as spineless Marco was just saying, he was granted asylum in this country because he knew he would be killed if he was returned to El Salvador. That was the conditions of his being accepted. And Marco Rubio knows that. And he just
he wasn't here illegally. He wasn't here illegally. He's not a terrorist.
He was here. He was here under asylum, not to be returned to El Salvador. And
he was here to be protected from the terrorists. And one of the things that people are worried about is, first, this was kind of caught on a hot mic, and now he's starting to say it openly, that the next stage will be to start deporting citizens to the hell of the El Salvadorian prison. It's kind of like hell, abandon all hope, ye who enter here, right? So now they're going to start deporting citizens is his next move.
Yeah. Work will set you free.
Yeah.
You mentioned that you're open to deporting individuals that aren't foreign aliens but are criminals to El Salvador. Does that include potentially U.S. citizens, fully naturalized Americans?
If they're criminals and if they hit people with baseball bats over their head that happen to be 90 years old, and if they rape 87-year-old women in Coney Island, Brooklyn, yeah, that includes them. What do you think? There's a special category of person? They're as bad as anybody that comes in. We have bad ones too, and I'm all for it because we can do things with the president for less money and have great security. And we have a huge prison population. We have a huge number of prisons, and then we have the private prisons, and some are operated well, I guess, and some aren't. But he does a great job with that. We have others that we're negotiating with too.
So there you have it. You know, he says they're not special. Well, they're special because they're American citizens and they have rights, due process rights, and also rights against cruel and unusual punishment.
Or being put into prisons off the country.
Right, where they'll die and never get out. Yeah.
It's chilling. Well, I'm so pleased to introduce our guest this week. You've seen her before. Her name is Laurie Winer. She's a journalist, a theater critic, and she's also an expert on the emergence of fascism in Germany in the 1930s, in particular, the emergence of Hitler. And when she's been on the show before, she has been eerily clairvoyant about what things might happen. And now they're happening. So we thought it was about time that we brought Laurie back on. And lo and behold, here she is.
Bonsoir. I'm so clairvoyant that I moved to France before the election. So I'm pretty clairvoyant.
And I left for 3 months on Inauguration Day.
Yeah. So yes, Laurie, we have to admit you were into fleeing before fleeing was cool.
That is right.
Now everybody's doing it.
Everybody will be doing it. I think
before you know it, everyone will be doing it. Exactly.
Yeah. A lot of people will be doing it.
Well, you know, one of our you're now our first guest to flee, Jason Stanley, the Yale professor, who teaches about authoritarian regimes. He was actually on our show, and we said to him, we interviewed him, and I actually asked him the question. So when will we know when it's time to flee? And I actually don't remember his answer. He gave a fairly nuanced and complicated answer, but he fled.
Yeah. And Timothy Snyder, right? Timothy Snyder left Yale.
Timothy Snyder, actually, they went together.
And now they're living in Canada.
Yep. He went to the University of Toronto. They moved the three of them together. So, but he said,
that's right. That's right.
He said there are a number of really factors you look at, right? And part of it is the deterioration of institutions. And part of what made him go was the Columbia settlement. The feeling that, okay, the law firms are kneeling, now the universities are kneeling. And he said, as someone who knows, right, each domino, right, as they fall one after the other in a collapse of a democracy, he said, that's the domino. That's the one. When that domino goes, right, when the university bends a knee, that's the last domino for me. That's the signal to go.
So maybe Harvard holds out hope for, people, institutions coming together and not standing alone.
Absolutely.
In order to have some leverage, possibly.
And Laurie, what I've heard is that the Ivy League is actually getting together and pooling resources. Also, the Big Ten in the Midwest. So you're finally seeing these folks wake up. And I don't know if you heard that great line by David Brooks, which I keep quoting, which is that Trump isn't transactional; he's an extortionist. And when you give in to an extortionist, the extortionist always wants more. And that's what we're seeing. And they're realizing it, thankfully.
Yes. I do have some, I see a few hopeful signs, which I'll get to, but I'm going to start with the really, the bad stuff. Because there were two things that happened in this past week that really resonated with my research into the Third Reich, that are things that may not be readily apparent to people who aren't just knee deep in this research, at this moment. So the first one, and I'm sure you're going to be talking about this anyway, was the incredible scene in the Oval Office when Trump hosted the president of El Salvador. Yeah. Okay, so everybody has seen it, I'm sure, but a reporter asked Trump about the return of Abrego Garcia, that poor man who's from Maryland. And Trump doesn't answer, but he has Pam Bondi answer for him. And she says, that's up to El Salvador. I mean, if they want to return him, that's not up to us. And then the reporter asked Bukali, the president of El Salvador, and he says, well, you're not suggesting that I smuggle a terrorist into the United States, right? I mean, how can I return him to the United States? What, I smuggle him in, or what do I do? Of course I'm not going to do that. It's like, the question is preposterous. I don't have the power to return him to the United States. So that's all a direct quote. So no one in that room has the power to do anything, or seemingly has anything to do with the fact that the man is there. And so no one's responsible for what happened. Obviously, this is beyond chilling, but it reminded me of a line at the end of a Holocaust documentary called Night and Fog, which was made in 1955. It was a French filmmaker, Alain Resnais. And at the very end of that film, and it's a very interesting film because it's not so much a documentary as kind of a meditation on what happened. It's very interesting. At the end, the narrator says, I'm not responsible, says the capo. I'm not responsible, says the officer. I'm not responsible. Then who is responsible? Holocaust deniers always shift the blame. I mean, some acts are so heinous that you don't want to believe that a human agency made it happen, and no one will take responsibility for it.
But Laurie, can I just add one thing? Because that's a very deep existential analysis. This reminds me of something a little more primitive. Growing up in the streets of New York, there used to be these these fast guys who would play 3-card Monte. I don't know if you remember that game where you try to find the queen and he's moving them around. And these people are so skilled at that. It's like, well, we can't get him because it's up to El Salvador. Well, El Salvador can't return him because that would be returning a terrorist. So wink, wink, nod, nod. Only here the prisoner is the queen, right? That we're shifting him around so that it's just a flim flam. But it's a blatant flim flam. It's an insult to our intelligence. The fact that the two men, like we've negotiated, having people removed from other countries, spies from Russia or China, we've had, here are the two heads of state. Obviously they could negotiate the return of this one man, and they're playing 3-card Monte. Because remember, he grew up in Queens, okay, where, the swindles aren't that complicated. Okay. And they're kind of in plain sight. And that's what we just saw. A wink, wink, not at all. I don't know. It just fell off the truck. Well, I didn't see it. But we all know you stole it. So it's just a bunch of bullshit.
Yeah. And also he's so powerful that he can end the war with Ukraine in one day, but he can't get this man back. It is just so ridiculous. But I wanted to say just one more thing about the denial. Do you remember the Hitler diary scandal in 1983? Okay, so for those who don't remember, it was a huge international scandal. Some two-penny forger forged a bunch of diaries by Hitler, and everybody got very excited because it was a scoop. It was a journalism scoop. And Stern, which was the West German magazine, and also the Sunday Times of London, paid the equivalent of 3.7 million for those diaries that were obvious frauds. But so why did everyone believe it? Well, of course, they wanted to believe it because it was a great scoop. But also, I looked at those diaries, and in those diaries, the interesting thing is that in the story, the diaries tell, Hitler never mentions the concentration camps. The diary, it was as if he didn't know about them. So the diaries expose this wish that Hitler was not personally responsible, which is, something you see in Holocaust denial over and over, right? And Ron Rosenbaum, who wrote Explaining Hitler, a great book, wrote that these people seem to believe that the Holocaust was some kind of spontaneous combustion born of bureaucratic exigency from below, without the complicity of Himmler or Heydrich or Hitler. And so that's what I saw in the Oval Office. Like, this was just spontaneously happened. No one did it,
Right.
So
it was a dance where no one was responsible. Yeah.
So if you want to see the whole show, and you really should see the whole show, please tune in to Shrinking Trump, the whole episode. You can catch it on Fridays. It drops at 3 p.m. as a live stream on the Really American Network. That's 3 p.m. Eastern time. And after that, you can watch it on YouTube. You can also listen to it on Spotify and Apple and wherever else you get your podcasts. So we hope to see you there.
See you there.